Get this poor woman off the plane right now, she is contaminating the air in first class. The voice of the captain thundered through the cabin, and the reaction was immediate. A few passengers burst out laughing while others raised their phones, delighted to catch a scene of public humiliation. The woman in the faded sweater just tightened her grip on her old backpack. Her eyes remained steady, and she said nothing. "Your place is in the terminal, not the sky," the head flight attendant sneered as she tore the ticket in half. The woman was shoved down the stairway amid mocking laughter as the PA system droned an apology for the inconvenience, claiming the situation had been resolved. Hours later, at the headquarters of Orion Air, an emergency meeting erupted. When the heavy doors opened, the same poor woman they had kicked off the plane walked in. But now she was wearing a black tailored suit with a gleaming badge on her chest. Her name was Lysandra Vale, chairwoman of Vale Aero Holdings. Behind her, the screen lit up with the headline, "Vale Holdings Re-Evaluates Acquisition of Orion Air." Let us go back to the moment on the tarmac. Lysandra stood there with the cold metal of the stairway biting into her palm. As she steadied herself, the laughter from the open door of the plane still echoed. It felt sharp and jagged like glass under her feet. Her sweater was a soft gray thing she had worn for years, and it hung loose on her frame. Her sneakers were scuffed and faded, and they squeaked against the pavement as she walked toward the terminal. She did not look back, not once. Her backpack was patched and fraying at the straps, and it bounced lightly against her shoulder. A man in a suit leaned out of the window of the plane. His expensive watch glinted in the sun as he called out, "Better luck next time, sweetheart." The other passengers roared with laughter. Lysandra felt her fingers tighten around the strap, but her face stayed calm and her steps remained even. She had been through worse, way worse. Inside the terminal, Lysandra paused by a coffee kiosk. The barista flicked his eyes over her worn clothes with a quick, dismissive glance. A group of business travelers nearby had briefcases polished to a shine. They whispered just loud enough for her to hear, saying she was probably there to clean the place. One man chuckled into his latte. The jaw of Lysandra tightened, but she did not turn around. She handed the barista a crumpled bill, took her coffee, and moved to a corner table. As she sat down, a child dropped a toy plane nearby. Its plastic wings skittered across the floor. Lysandra picked it up. Her fingers brushed the tiny model gently before she handed it back to the boy. His mother looked flustered and muttered a quick thanks, but her eyes lingered on the faded sweater with a mix of pity and disdain. Lysandra sipped her coffee. Her gaze was distant. The shape of the toy plane lingered in her mind like a quiet promise. The terminal was a blur of noise and motion, with announcements crackling and kids running and suitcases clattering. Lysandra found a bench near a window, set her bag down, and sat. Her hands were folded in her lap, steady as always. A woman nearby, juggling a coffee and a phone, glanced at her and muttered to her friend that they let anyone in here now. The eyes of Lysandra flicked up, catching the gaze of the woman for a split second. The woman froze and then turned away, pretending to check her phone. Lysandra did not say a word. She did not need to. That look was calm and unflinching, and it said everything. She pulled out a small notebook from her bag, flipped it open, and jotted something down. Just a few words. Then she closed it, tucked it away, and stared out at the planes rolling by. Years ago she had sat in a different kind of airport. It was smaller and dirtier. The old station wagon belonging to her mom had broken down just outside. Lysandra was barely a teenager then, and she had waited on a cracked vinyl seat while her dad argued with a mechanic over the phone. The air smelled like burnt coffee and cheap air freshener. Her mom had leaned over, brushing a strand of hair from the face of Lysandra, and said, "You do not need to be loud to be heard, baby, just be steady." Lysandra had nodded, clutching a library book to her chest. That was before the money came. Before the family name became a whisper in boardrooms. Before she learned to hide who she was, not out of shame, but because it was the only way to see the true colors of people. Back in the present, the fluorescent lights of the terminal buzzed overhead. The phone in the pocket of Lysandra vibrated. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and saw a text from her assistant Claire. It said, "They are freaking out at headquarters, are you good?" Lysandra typed back quick and simple, saying she was fine and to keep them waiting. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and stood slinging her backpack over one shoulder. The laughter from the plane was still fresh in her mind, but it did not shake her. She had planned this. She booked the ticket under the name of her assistant and wore the old clothes. She boarded the flight to see what the staff of Orion Air would do when they thought no one important was watching. They had shown her exactly what she needed to see. The humiliation on that plane had started slow like a spark catching dry grass. Lysandra had walked up the jetway with her boarding pass in hand and stepped into the first-class cabin. The seats were wide leather, the kind that screamed money. A guy in a tailored blazer who looked to be in his mid-40s with a smug grin and too much cologne looked her up and down and snorted. He asked if she lost her way to economy loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. A woman across the aisle dripping in gold jewelry chimed in saying to let her stay because it was like a charity case field trip. The cabin rippled with chuckles. Lysandra did not flinch. She slid her backpack under the seat and sat down. Her movements were deliberate, like she was placing each piece of herself exactly where it belonged. Then came Tanya, the head flight attendant. She was all sharp cheekbones and glossy lipstick with a uniform pressed to perfection. She stopped at the seat of Lysandra with one hand on her hip and tilted her head like she was inspecting a stain. She asked if Lysandra was sure she did not mix up her ticket with someone else. Her voice was syrupy, but the edge was cutting. Lysandra met her eyes calm as a lake and said she was sure. Her voice was low and steady. The smile on Tanya tightened. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound private, but loud enough for others to hear. She said this is first class and they have standards, and noted that the bag was practically falling apart. A guy too rose back, laughed so hard he coughed on his drink. As Tanya hovered, a woman in a sleek red dress with her hair pulled tight leaned over from the next row. She was the kind of person who always had a glass of champagne in hand, and her smile was practiced and cruel. She told Lysandra that this was not a thrift store and that she was embarrassing herself. The laughter in the cabin grew sharper and phones tilted to catch the reaction. The fingers of Lysandra paused on her backpack zipper and her eyes lifted to meet the woman. She asked softly, "Am I?" The woman blinked and her champagne glass trembled slightly. Lysandra turned back to her bag, zipping it closed with a slow, deliberate pull that cut through the noise like a warning. Captain Elliot Crane was next. He strode out of the cockpit with swagger and pressed lapels. His aviator sunglasses were tucked into his shirt like he was auditioning for a movie. He did not even look at the ticket. He just sized up Lysandra with her faded sweater and plain sneakers and bare face. He barked that this was not a soup kitchen and ordered them to get her out of there. The cabin erupted. Phones came out and cameras rolled. A woman with a designer scarf leaned forward smirking and said this happens when you let riffraff in because it ruins the vibe. Another guy narrated his video saying the poor girl thought she could sneak into first class. Lysandra kept her hands folded in her lap. She did not argue or raise her voice. She just looked at Elliot and told him he was making a choice right now. He blinked thrown for a second but then waved her off and told her to get moving. Tanya tore the ticket in half and the rip was loud in the suddenly quiet cabin. She pointed to the door. Lysandra stood slowly and slung her backpack over her shoulder. The passengers were still laughing and some were clapping. She paused at the door, turning just enough to look at Tanya. She thanked her and said she had seen enough. The words hung heavy like a stone dropped in still water. Tanya faltered for a second. Then Lysandra walked down the stairs and the laughter chased her out into the cold. At the headquarters of Orion, the air was thick with panic. Gavin, the interim CEO, paced the conference room. His tie was loose and his face was red. He was a big guy used to throwing his weight around. He slammed his hand on the table and yelled that this was a PR disaster. The room was packed with executives and PR reps. A screen showed the video of Lysandra being escorted off the plane, which had gone viral with 50 million views. Comments poured in calling it disgusting and urging a boycott. Gavin pointed at the PR team and ordered them to take the video down and pay whoever they had to. Elliot and Tanya sat at the far end of the table trying to look unbothered. Elliot leaned back with his arms crossed and insisted she did not belong there. Tanya nodded, picking at her nails, and claimed she was just following protocol because the backpack was a health hazard. A junior staffer with glasses spoke up nervously. He mentioned hearing that Vale Holdings sent someone to test them like a secret shopper and asked what if it was her. The room went quiet before Gavin laughed dismissively, saying a CEO would not wear that outfit. Before the meeting ended, a woman from the PR team hesitated and then spoke up. She slid a tablet across the table, showing a memo from Vale Holdings that mentioned an anonymous evaluation. Gavin scanned the words "Customer Experience Audit in Progress." His face froze. He shoved the tablet back and called it nonsense, but his voice cracked. Tanya glanced at Elliot and her eyes narrowed. The junior staffer stopped tapping his pen and stared at the floor. Lysandra, meanwhile, was in a cab with her backpack beside her. The driver glanced at her in the mirror and commented on her rough day. She smiled a little and agreed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Claire saying they were scrambling. Lysandra looked out the window, watching the city blur by. She thought of her dad telling her that people show you who they are when they think you are nobody. She typed back that she was ready. The next day, the boardroom at Orion Air was tense. Executives were dressed to impress with tight ties and plastered smiles. They expected a strategic partner. Gavin stood at the head of the table practicing his handshake. Tanya had fresh lipstick and Elliot had his sunglasses on the table. The door opened and Lysandra walked in wearing a black vest that was simple but sharp. Her hair was pulled back. She wore no jewelry. The room froze. The smile dropped from the face of Tanya. The jaw of Elliot tightened. Gavin hovered his hand midair. Lysandra did not sit. She stood at the end of the table with her clean but old backpack on the floor. She greeted them calmly, introducing herself as Lysandra Vale, chairwoman of Vale Aero Holdings. She said she believed they had met before. She let the silence sit. Tanya gripped her chair. Elliot stared at the table. Gavin forced a laugh and stepped forward, calling it an honor. Elliot showed up at the hotel the next morning, trying to charm his way out. He asked her to tour the new fleet. Lysandra was on her way out. She stopped and told him that he had his chance to show her who he was. She walked past him, leaving him with a frozen smile. Outside, she climbed into a car. Claire updated her that the stock was still tanking and asked if she was ready to pull the plug. The press conference came 2 days later. Gavin stood at the podium sweating and claiming Orion Air was stronger than ever. Reporters fired sharp questions about the woman who was removed. Gavin gave vague answers. Then Lysandra stood up. Her presence was undeniable. The room went still. She stepped to the podium slowly. She announced that Vale Holdings would not be acquiring Orion Air. Her voice was steady. Claire tapped a tablet, and the screen behind them lit up with the security footage of Tanya tearing the ticket and the passengers laughing. The room gasped. Lysandra told the crowd that an airline that judges passengers by their clothes does not deserve to fly under her name. Reporters typed furiously. Gavin went pale. Lysandra stepped away, letting the truth speak. The fallout was swift. The acquisition was cancelled. The stock plummeted another 20%. Gavin yelled at another meeting, claiming they could fix it, but no one believed him. Tanya cried, saying she didn't know. Elliot sat silently. A junior staffer muttered that they didn't care to know. Lysandra was in her hotel room when Claire texted that they were begging and Gavin offered to resign. Lysandra thought of her mom telling her not to let them make her small. She typed back to let them come to her. The next morning, Gavin, Tanya, and Elliot showed up at her hotel looking defeated. Gavin pleaded for a chance. Tanya clutched the arm of Lysandra and said she was just following rules. Elliot mumbled he would take the blame. Lysandra freed her arm and asked them a simple question. She asked if any of them said stop when she was on that plane. The question went unanswered. A week later, Lysandra made her move. At a quiet press event, she announced that Vale Holdings had acquired Orion Air through an anonymous fund called Skyline Capital, owning 51%. She silenced the buzzing room, saying this was not about winning but fixing what was broken. She announced new leadership comprising people who had been overlooked, including ground crew and back office staff. Gavin was gone. Tanya and Elliot were suspended. The news hit hard. Some called her vengeful, but she did not respond. Months later, the first flight under the new Orion Air took off. Lysandra was on board in economy with her backpack. The plane was full of students and families thanks to the Flight for All program. The crew was different, including a baggage handler turned flight attendant. Tanya and Elliot were there reinstated but demoted to working the beverage cart. They did not speak to her, but their eyes showed regret. A man in a worn jacket approached Lysandra and told her that what she did meant something to people like him. Lysandra thanked him and said it was for all of them. The cabin hummed with hope. As the plane climbed, a young girl with a stuffed bear smiled at Lysandra. Her mother whispered thanks, saying the girl had never flown before. When the plane landed, the passengers clapped. Lysandra stepped off the plane quietly. She knew she had been judged and pushed aside, but she kept going. The sky did not judge, it just waited for her to rise. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.